The End of a Dream. Jenny and Jack, a recently retired couple, had spent the last 4 years creating a new home for themselves in the south of France. Jack was a retired businessman, Jenny an artist, and together they constructed their dream home. 3 weeks prior to our session, the dream was destroyed by a terrible incident. At 4 a.m, Jenny was awakened by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path outside. The cat on her bed jumped out of the window in panic. When she got up and went towards the door of the bedroom, she heard loud hammering, as if someone was trying to break through the front door. She realized that there were several people attempting to force their way into the house. In the meantime, her husband had started to wake up and was inquiring about the situation. When his wife screamed from the top of her lungs, he knew something was wrong. He went back to the bedroom, retrieved the gun he kept there, and went outside to look. A tall man dressed all in black appeared, his face fully covered by a balaclava. To Jack, he looked like Darth Vader, the Star Wars character. To Jenny, he was a giant black monster. The man in black held a shiny metallic object in his hands. He was not alone. There were 2 others, just as tall, and the situation seemed dire. Suddenly, the burglar brought the shiny object upwards. Jack, well trained in the military, shot immediately to defend himself and Jenny. He hit the man in black, and all 3 members of the gang fled, climbing over the wall. In his description of the shooting, Jack used an interesting expression. The shot was fired. He didn't say, "I shot the man." His military brain had taken over automatically and pulled the trigger without conscious thought. The couple now found themselves wrapped in a deafening silence. The threat was over. The whole sequence had taken barely 6 minutes. Next they called for help, and when the officers arrived, they discovered the dead body of the burglar near the wall. Jack was taken to the police station. He was interrogated repeatedly the next day. The investigators soon decided that he had killed the burglar in self-defense and released him without legal consequences. Jack was even allowed to return to his home country. The man who he shot was the boss of a local gang well known to the police. The other 2 men could not be found. Then the nightmare began. Jenny was in a permanent state of panic, while Jack did his best to remain calm. They changed the locks in their permanent home in Switzerland, installed security cameras throughout, and did everything else they could think of to prevent another attack. On a rational level, they were vaguely aware that their reactions were exaggerated and that something else was going on with them. A highly unusual, painful event leads to specific reactions in which your organism tries to process the experienced situation. These reactions can be a combination of re-experiencing, avoidance, and hyperarousal. All 3 could be easily identified in Jack and Jenny. At this point, after reading my book, telling their stories, and receiving the information, Jack and Jenny felt safe enough to begin processing the event with logosynthesis. I asked them, "Which of you is suffering the most?" They both agreed it was Jenny. Jack's suffering was less visible. He seemed to be in control and was able to support Jenny in her pain. I distilled 3 key moments or perceptions in Jenny's experience. 1. The noise of the steps on the gravel path. 2. The hammering on the front door. 3. The image of the black monster. None were dominant, so I took the chronological approach, treating one after the other. Because Jenny experienced a lack of safety during these traumatic moments, I added an additional safety component by saying the logosynthesis sentences on her behalf. 3 times the cycle started with a maximum distress score of 10, and 3 times the 10 reduced down to 0. In the last cycle, I had Jenny say the sentences herself to give her more power in the process. After every cycle, Jenny smiled, but she also expressed doubts about whether the results would hold. Jenny had initially shared feelings of deep grief. They had planned to grow old together in that beautiful house, hosting family and friends. This time Jenny sounded calmer and more rational, being able to reflect instead of being locked in the grief of the loss. At the next session, the couple entered smiling, and Jenny told me that she had tried to activate the memory of the man in black, but she hadn't been able to, and the memory of the noise was completely gone. For the first time since the incident, she had slept through the night without interruption. She was astonished. I said that I couldn't explain it logically, but that I didn't mind. I summarized the energy model from my Logosynthesis self-coaching book in a few sentences to help frame their experience. For Jack, the last session had dealt with the loss of his paradise, and this was still bothering him as well as Jenny. They were in the process of selling the house because they didn't want to expose themselves to the risk that the robber gang would come back and retaliate. This was a realistic fear which I didn't try to change. Jenny was very clear about losing a place of deep togetherness with friends and family. When I asked Jack for an image representing that paradise, he described sitting at a table with his computer with a view of the Mediterranean. The level of distress over the loss of this magnificent view was a 7. I gave him the sentences for the view with a modification of the third one. I retrieve all my energy bound up in all my reactions to the fact that I won't have this view anymore and take it to the right place in myself. After a few minutes of processing, during which Jack was visibly moved, he was able to find his usual optimistic stance, realizing that such things happen in life. I did another cycle with Jenny about her fear of the dark that had started after the incident. Returning home, the darkness around their permanent home had reactivated the memory of that tragic incident, and this had become a secondary trauma. This was neutralized with one cycle of the sentences for the perception of the darkness. Logosynthesis is very well equipped to treat a type 1 PTSD, the sequelae of a one-time traumatic incident.